So I hope. Oh yeah, okay. Yeah, thank you very much for the introduction. I really hope it's interesting enough to wake you up from all the food coma earlier. So yeah, you've already heard the title, and I don't have to repeat it. So I would just jump straight into it to like get everything going. Oh yeah, no. So the thing is, we're looking at moving magnet actuators. They're not a very new thing, but they're getting more and more interesting due to like industry developments. And they're oh, sorry, they're very simple. So what they do is you have a magnet in there. You have a magnet held by two springs, uh, sometimes only one on one side. In like normally in a housing that also houses a coil inside. The thing is, you have a coil, you have a permanent magnet, and the combination when you yeah run current through the coil, you have another magnetic field. These two interact, and you have a Lorentz force, creating a force that is pushing the magnet into one direction and the housing to the other direction. If you have a sinusoidal current, then you have a normal vibration as you know it. Uh, in reality, they look pretty much like this. Sometimes this is furthermore called device A for all the plots later. This is actually a rumble motor for a PS5 gaming controller, so they're quite small. And you see, like you have the housing and a little piece of metal that is just a like magnetic field guide in this sense. And also you have a polymer membrane in this case, which acts as a spring, but also dampens it to increase the bandwidth. Compared to that, devices B and C, these are only small test devices. You see the coil wound around it, or two coils in this case. And additionally to having a smaller neodymium magnet, you also have stamped metal springs on each end, creating less losses and also stronger yeah spring constant. So, and why am I looking at these? And what actually am I looking at? The thing is, these MMAs are often designed for one specific frequency. You know them from, like, I think most of you at least once held a gaming controller in your hand or had a vibrating phone. The thing is, they're always designed to have one specific frequency, for example, 50 or 100 hertz, to just have like a nice vibrating feeling. But the problem is, this resonance behavior is strongly dependent on the surroundings. So in this case, it really strongly depends on if it's free hanging on just some wires or it's clamped into a vise. You have very different resonance frequencies, and also kind of different like quality factors for the resonance, which makes it very hard to operate sometimes because as soon as you change the haptic environment, maybe put it into a child's hand or an adult's hand, the resonance changes. So you can never operate it at resonance. And you also cannot really control the force you're exerting because depending on the resonance, you have different amount of energy consumed by the device, different amount of force exerted. And if you don't know the environment, you're always somewhere off the resonance. So some of you might know it, but when you grip a gaming controller very hard, the vibration also feels less because you're operating at a different part of the spectrum. So, but maybe there might be something in there that one could use for any application, and that's why we looked at like the impedance spectra of these devices by using an impedance analyzer from Keysight. We used just a small range of 20 to 200 hertz that covers most resonance frequencies of these devices and even further down and up. So we have good measurements. And one very important part, if you want to redo this, you have to set a pretty high point delay. This is the delay between setting the excitation frequency and doing the measurement itself, which makes these kinds of measurements sometimes pretty long running. Like some of these measurements took like 5 to 10 minutes per frequency sweep because you have 1,000 or 500 points with 2 seconds of delay. So that actually adds up a lot. But if you don't use that, you still have leftover vibration from the previous frequency. It really needs some time to settle in. Additionally, we limited the excitation amplitude to 10 millivolts to just stay within the linear range of all the springs used, so that there's not a lot of non-linearity inside, because then things get extra weird. Yeah, so to going to the measurement configurations, we have two kinds of configurations. The first one is baseline configurations, just to get to know the system a bit, and which is just clamping it in a vise. And no, this is not an ad. Or just hanging the device on its wires to have it as free hanging as possible. And also sitting it on a table, but that was not that important afterwards. And we have in situ measurements. So basically just keeping the device in one's hand or gripping it between two fingers. So as you saw earlier in this picture, this is basically from one of the measurements and also my hand. So first of all, the baseline measurements, they were pretty simple, and also you've seen one of the measurements already. You see that depending on if you have it clamped or free hanging, you have very distinctly different resonance frequencies. For example, for device A, you have like 110 hertz and maybe around 60 to 70 hertz, which is quite a lot of difference just by putting it into a vise or having it hang freely. And you can also see that the on-table configuration really was not important because it completely overlaps in our case with the clamped configuration. But that makes sense because the friction just holds it steady. There's not a lot of force involved in our measurements. And what you can also see, and this will be the reason why I'll mostly go into device A, it has a lot higher dissipation due to the polymer membrane, so a lower quality factor, and the plots look nicer for that. So for the in situ measurements, I will also show you two different kinds or two different categories. The first is measurement of the same participant, in this case, me. Just as I've shown you earlier, they use configurations A and B, so holding it in one hand or squeezing it between two fingers, but also with different amount of strength when squeezing the device. So that's why there's a lot of measurement data, and don't worry, you don't have to look at the zoomed out version right now. Additionally, we have a small comparison between different participants. So, and this is only for the edge cases. So holding it as strongly as possible and applying zero force, because these are the only ones that you can really quantify. Like holding it as strong as possible is, funnily enough, like pretty similar, no matter like who's holding it. And zero force can be easily reproduced by not gripping your hand. So looking at device A, which will be most interesting just because the plots look nicer and more compact. On the left side, you see the measurements for configuration A. So just having it held in one hand, and on the right, configuration B between two fingers. Looking at configuration A first, we see that we still have a lot of measurements there. But starting at, oops. Okay. Oh, no, it's good. Okay. So starting at just putting the device into one's open hand, just putting it on there. Don't close your hand, just putting it on there. You see that compared to the baseline measurement here of free hanging, you have a lot higher dissipation and a lot less quality factor here. So you could imagine that just putting it, especially in my soft office worker hands, you have a lot of soft tissue that is able to dissipate a lot of energy. So you don't really have any coupling to any mass, but just, yeah, friction and what's on. And you have not the real frequency shift. So the resonance frequency is actually pretty similar. But it gets interesting when you start closing the hand and applying some force. So hand zero is just closing the hand without any real force, just keeping the fingers touching the device on all sides. And hand one is actually squeezing it a bit, how you normally hold like some kind of device, like I hold this presenter. So when you just close the hand, you still have not a real frequency shift, but you have a lot more dissipation again, as more of my squiggly fingers are touching the device. So more dissipation can happen, but there's not much, mass coupled into the system. But that changes when you really start applying force, because then you really give it some way to dissipate or to, transfer the energy to the mass of your hand, and you have a lot more mass that has to be moved. And most of you probably from like introductory physics courses know the more mass an oscillator has, the lower its resonance frequency if you don't change the spring. So you see that first, also interestingly, the quality factor again decreases if you just squeeze it a little bit, probably due to more contact with all the skin around it. And also the resonance frequency shifts a bit. Now we come to an even more interesting part is when you start applying even more force. So just going to like, yeah, it feeling pretty strong. Like, again, this is hardly like comparable, unfortunately, and quantifiable. But if you really start squeezing it, you see that the resonance frequency is actually moving over quite a bit. And the quality factor actually increases again. So you have less dissipation, although you hold it even stronger, which is probably due to just compression of the tissue. We looked it up there are a few papers by people from the medicine field that really compressing tissue makes it harder. And you can imagine it if you really squeeze your hand and it starts cramping as well. It is very hard to press in there. Yeah. And if you then increase the force to like your pain tolerance, basically, hold it as strongly as possible, you have an even higher uh, quality factor, and the configuration actually becomes very similar to the baseline configuration. Unfortunately, on this beamer, you don't really see it, but this is about the resonance peak of the baseline clamped configuration. So you can actually move the resonance frequency from one baseline configuration over like this curve over to the other, just by squeezing your hand and holding it tighter. Something similar can be seen on the right side for configuration B when you just hold it between your fingers like this. You see that first by just holding the device, not applying real force, just holding it, you again have a lower quality factor compared to before and not a real resonance shift. Going further, just applying some more force, you get a lower quality factor again by having more coupled in soft tissue, and you get the frequency shift due to the mass of your fingers and stuff. But what's actually interesting here is even if you apply the most force possible, or at least most force for me, you can't actually get the quality factor up again. And that is probably like that would be one thing where you can determine, hey, is the person holding it in their hands or just between the fingers? Because in that case, probably due to the movement of the joints in your fingers, there is still a lot of energy dissipation, and you can't just grip it as tightly between two fingers compared to one hand. Yeah. So for all the other devices, so devices B and C, we have a very similar. Okay. We have a very similar effect, so I won't actually go over it much. But now we can get to like the comparison between people. So when people hold it as strongly as possible, we used a few of our colleagues for that, one of which is actually sitting here, and just told them to hold the device as tightly as possible. You see that the measurement data is very much similar. So you get pretty much the same resonance spectrum as when holding it for another person or clamping it. On the other hand, figuratively and literally, uh, just placing it in an open hand is strongly dependent on the person. So this is my soft academic hands, and this is of a colleague of ours who is working on a farm on the side. You see that there's like probably more muscles involved, less fat tissue in the hand. Therefore, you have a resonance shift and a higher quality factor already. And the thing is, unfortunately, I can't go into much detail, but the thing is, we also tried modeling it like you do it in first year physics class. Unfortunately, I have to go through that a bit longer. I did talk way too much, but you can actually model it quite nicely, and it actually fits quite well. All of these solid curves that you saw earlier are actually the model. We just fit the parameters to the measurement data and plotted it like this. It looks way better than just letting MATLAB plot it. And these axes are the real measurement data, but only like 1% to keep it a bit tidier. So it actually did overlap. But the problem is it doesn't fit every use case. There are some use cases that don't work, but I think I have to get over that very quickly. Yeah, the conclusion is everything that we did, and we will try to get a more sophisticated model with like more complex system, and also try to actively control the force that is exerted by these MMAs for applications, for example, in medicine or just for a gaming controller. Thank you very much for your patience and your interest. I hope it was interesting enough.